Hello, and welcome to Fireside Chat number 30. It's been that long. Uh, so, as always, we pick a topic just before we start recording, and we have fun discussing the topic, sharing information, sharing knowledge, but also our opinions. And a lot of them are quite unqualified, but we hope that you find them useful. And as always, if you like it, click subscribe so you're notified when a new episode comes. And also give us some comments, give us some encouragement by hitting the like button if you do like it. So without further ado, the topic for today is actually a very important topic. It's about XP, extreme programming. And what we want to discuss today is how relevant is extreme programming in in this day and age, right? So it's been around for quite a while. So how relevant is it now that we have so many other practices and ways of working and mindsets around? So who wants to go first?
Why don't we? How do we even? What do we? How do we even see extreme programming? Because I know that we might have slightly different views. Like, do we consider this as a methodology or like a group of practices? I can tell you, like, I think this is a good, because not everyone might be familiar. So I'll tell you like what I think extreme programming is first. Yeah. And then we can talk about how relevant it is. So my understanding is extreme programming started as a group of practice, uh, and that was first tried in the C3 project for Chrysler in Detroit. And then they put a lot of those practices together. They had like Kent Beck, they had Ron Jeffries, they had like Martin Fowler, they had Chet Hendricks, or what is the other one? I forgot. Ward Cunningham, and quite a few people in that project. And they were trying a few different practices for the time. And they started always like, okay, let's try that practice. Oh, is it a good idea? Yes. Okay, let's do that all the time. Oh, what about this? So what if we start working together all the time and pairing everything we do? Oh, that sounds a good idea. Okay, let's do that all the time. What if you write the test? Okay, let's write the test. Okay, let's do that all the time. What if we try to integrate more often the work that we do? Okay, let's do that all the time. And this thing about taking some practices that they judged important or good practices and pushing them to the limit, trying to apply in everything that they did. That's where the name extreme came from. So extreme programming. And then, so this was in the mid 90s. And then later on, because they had a focus on the short feedback loop, inspect and adapt at all levels, it became part of the umbrella that later in 2001 became known as Agile. But it's one of the, so this is why I was saying that story, because I consider extreme programming an agile methodology. Although it was created before Agile, but it shares that inspect and adapt at multiple levels, and that is what qualifies it to be under that umbrella. So I see extreme programming as an agile methodology full of practices and values. That's my take on XP.
How about you, Jose?
I don't know. The we use the word methodology quite lightly. For me, methodology would be more like, the rational unified process kind of thing. No, where you have like all of these prescriptions on, very detailed and so on. So I think it's more, let's say, like a framework, uh, within which to work. No, and it's not just a collection of practices for me. There is a mindset behind it. There is a process behind it, although we can discuss that, but not a lot of people know what the mindset is or what the process is. They tend to stick with just the practices. And yeah, I would call it more like a framework than a very
I would
prescriptive.
agree with you, Jose. I call it framework not in the sense of like a very rigid bunch of things, but like a framework, like a values
Ways of
framework
working.
is. Yeah,
Ways
it's
ways
ways.
of working.
Yeah, and I think it's important what you said, Sandro, is that they By the way, they've always quite a few of the originators of XP or extreme programming have said that they regret calling it extreme because there's nothing extreme about it. It's just sensible things, right? And it's to me like when these are things born out of trial, and these things have worked, and let's put them out and let's have other people adopt them because they worked really well for them, and a lot of them are very sensible. And yes, I would call it a framework because even a lot of the XP proponents, when they talk about practices, they said these are just the practices that we kind of came up with at the time, and they've always said that they meant to evolve. In fact, they were evolving it, and they saw nothing wrong with practices that originated elsewhere to then become part of the XP practices as well. So they never created this kind of like a closeness. They created an open framework. They said like even the values like if think about the Ken Beck's XP Explained second book, he comes up with about, I think 4 or 5 values, but then I distinctly remember him saying there are other values. There are values that you may also have, and these are just the ones that we found useful. But it's more about, again, a framework for choosing values or allowing values to form the basis of your ways of working. And then he talks about principles in XP, but again, he talks about principles taking from values, coming up with principles to bridge the gap between the
The
practices
practices
and
and
the
the
values.
values. Yeah.
Yeah. And so at the higher level, at a meta level, he is describing, or they are describing, a framework on how you could do sensible things. And by the way, here is a very concrete example. And you could do worse than just adopting and then adapting them. So there is quite so, and it's that meta framework that is actually the more important aspect, and the values, principles, and practices are a snapshot in time and for a particular thing that actually could be a good starting point for a lot of people.
Yeah,
That's how I see it.
I use like a methodology more on the light weight kind of sense, like because I don't disagree what you're saying. Although, like you see that a lot of the implementations they tend to be a bit more dogmatic in terms of, okay, those are the practices that we have, so we need to follow those practices and stuff. And as soon as we start going that direction, is when you start becoming a stronger sense of a methodology of following a method instead of just having a framework that you work under, right? So
Yeah.
so maybe the
But that's
reason,
not the intent. That's
yeah,
more the application, that people who kind of miss the intent to some level. Right?
that can be true as well, because I remember they talking about as a framework, but you can also find definitions where it defines XP as a method. But yeah, I think that is a good distinction, because this is probably like in terms of relevance, it is a good distinction. One thing is to say like those are a set of guiding principles or this framework that you work under. Uh, the other one is like, yes, there are quite a few practices in there, and if you just focus on applying them, they become a little bit a more dogmatic approach of implementing XP, and then it gets much closer to a stronger methodology that you follow a method, right?
Yeah.
So okay.
So this is the thing, because also I think this is quite a relevant question, because we interview a lot of people, and at least in my experience here in the Spanish market, we get people who know about the practices of XP, but they don't know about XP, right? And I
They
think
know about
that's,
some of the practices, not all.
yeah, exactly,
Very
right.
few practices.
Yeah.
So they they know things like TDD or pair programming, this kind of stuff, or continuous integration, things like this, but they don't understand where that comes from. They don't understand how the practices fit together. They don't understand, like there's a lot of things that they don't
It yeah.
haven't thought about.
It's almost sad, really, that for example, test-driven development or test first, as it was originally described, has become a much bigger and much known thing, which is a practice, an example of a bunch of practices in a framework that is about values and principles, right?
Mhm.
So it's just like, say, people say, what's XP? Test driven development or pair programming? No, no, that's not, like, it's a thing in there, but it's like you're describing the whole with a very tiny part, basically.
But see, like for example, when you talk about relevance, because those practices that you mentioned, because like I invite like people listening or watching, just to Google for extreme programming practices, and you go to the images and try to find images, because like you see like three circles of practices where the inner circle will have more technical practices, more tech practices that are closer to the code, as the examples that mentioned Jose gave, like in terms of refactoring, test-driven development, pair programming, and stuff like that, right? So, and as you start going wider to the outer layers, you start having more collaborative practices that are more related to team agreements and how you plan releases, and how to work with other roles in your organization. That starts even getting almost like getting very close to what Scrum, to a certain degree, describes, right? So that is like when Speed talks about like the outer practices, the more behavioral interaction practices, they start overlapping with other methodologies, and this is for me like one of the interesting things, because like as there are other agile frameworks or methodologies, I don't want to go back to that previous discussion, but like as there are other I'll call it methodologies just to simplify, but like other disciplines in agile that promote certain things like that, mainly Scrum, um, would it be one of the reasons where, like for example, XP became very focused on the very technical disciplines because there was nothing like it, and then the other methodologies that were more focused on processes and collaboration, they end up getting that space, if you like. And then XP was reduced more to the technical practices. That's kind of the
uh,
feeling that I
I
have.
Yeah, no, I personally think that XP is a complex thing, and to understand it because it's not prescriptive is the reason that it's so. Test first part is prescriptive. It's very
Mhm.
easy to understand. There's book on it. Can I in self wrote a very good book on it, um, and so it's easy to get your head around, and it's very narrow, right? In my similar to, I would say, Scrum. It's very prescriptive. It's very easy to start adopting it, right? XP is of all those practices is the one, in my view, that is more meta. It has these values and principles, and even above that, it describes these ways of working, and I think they are very difficult to prescribe. They're not about prescription. They're about understanding, a much deeper understanding. And even like Ken Peck himself talks about the role of a good XP coach on when somebody, because because they're not prescriptive, you can't just pick up a book. I mean, you can, but you really have to really try to understand it in order to apply it, because they almost have a philosophical aspect to them that is actually quite difficult at a more uh, superficial level to apply. They have to
I'm
be applied deeper if you want to apply it holistically. And I think that makes it very difficult to apply, or very difficult to prescribe, very difficult to say, do this, do this, do this, do that for every context, because it's meant to be adapted for its context for every
okay.
team.
I understand that, but I have a counterpoint for that because Kanban, for instance, is also not very prescriptive, and Kanban has a much bigger adoption rate, I would say, than XP in many contexts that we are,
Uh,
that we've
I, I,
seen.
I would say
And
Kanban is narrower in scope that XP is, much narrower in scope. That
It's
so
narrowing its scope. Okay, but what you said it was kind of like it's not that prescriptive, and I'm comparing
no,
prescriptiveness,
no,
so to
I know,
speak.
but like if you got so the narrower you get into something, the more prescriptive you get it. So if we are discussing what is more prescriptive and what is less prescriptive, I think you got Scrum, you got Kanban, and you got XP, which is a lot less prescriptive if you're looking at the thing holistically. To be
I disagree. I have Kanban on less prescriptive, then you have something like Scrum, and then you have something like XP, which for me goes into a much higher level of detail on describing specific practices and things like that. So I kind of disagree with that. You want to tell me? I'll tell you
no,
my
no, no.
theory.
Okay, okay. So what
I'll
I'm
tell you
actually
my
so
theory about it. I'll
no,
tell
no.
you
Well,
tell you my theory about it.
let me tell you. I think what I'm talking about is not the practices part of XP. Practices part are prescriptive. What I'm talking about is applying XP at a deeper level, which is about the values and the principles, and understanding some of the and even when we talk about the XP practices, the ones that really people adopt, like testing and development, so they are prescriptive, but there are certain other practices in XP that don't get adopted, like energized work or metaphor. They are
I I
they are not
agree. I
prescriptive
agree.
and they
Listen,
don't get adopted. But then you
this
get a
is what I
values and
think.
other stuff that doesn't get adopted at all.
I see it like in layers, right? Like Kanban, yeah, has values and a couple of principles that they give you. That's about it. Visualize the work, manage the work, manage the flow, etc., etc. Right? Like there's like there's values, there's principles. That's about it. Anything else, you can make it whatever you want. Yeah.
Yeah,
Then
but
you have
it's sorry, go on.
then you have a Scrum, the PDCA. This is feedback loops. You have it at the day level, at the no, and you're learning. No, but I'm giving you roles. I'm giving you specific events that you need
Ceremonies, yeah,
to
yeah.
do, etc. Right, and then you have XP, yeah, which for me, you know, has some of those things as well, plus the engineering practices and so on. So for me, from the point of view of prescriptiveness on things that you can start from and you can adapt and all you want, but there is this list here that you can start from, and it's more detailed, I would say, or more exhaustive to some extent for software development at least, no, and you can work from that. My theory is not so much the less prescriptive. My theory is that XP did not create a business around it. And this is the main difference, because when you have a business around it, then it's in people's interest to promote that and get it applied in places and so on. And this is why I think Scrum, for instance, is very popular. Kanban is now very popular as well, with the Kanban University and everything that David Anderson has been doing and so on. And XP doesn't have that. It has the books, it has the mindset. It's not lacking any. Like I'm saying, it's a really good. We use it, no, like we use it
Mhm.
because we think it's the right way to build software, no, and to drive that. But it is missing that incentive to make it widespread and so on. So people tend to pick the specific practices that solve their issue, and that's what drives the adoption of whatever. No, if it's I have a problem with quality, hey, maybe we should do testing and we should do let's try this. If I have a and that's my theory behind this, right? Like the driver is usually more at the individual level than it is at the global level or macro level, if you like. What do
I
you think?
think I know I personally think it's a very good theory, and I think it can there can be many reasons, but I think one of the reasons that the people could not package it up is because of its scope as well, right? It's vast. It's quite a big thing. I totally agree that like creating a business, creating certification, so on. In some ways, having like an army of coaches coming in who kind of whose business it is and has helped things like Scrum and has helped things like Lean and or Kanban specifically. And I agree with that. but I think that's one of the reasons. And I think the other reason is that it is a much more bigger in scope thing, and actually to apply it holistically, it's much bigger.
It's a more complete. I will use the word framework because I don't want to go back to framework versus methodology, right? So,
you call it, you use framework, methodology, and what was
yeah,
the other one? Discipline.
discipline. Yeah. So it is certainly far more complete. Let's say. I think that when you adopt XP as a whole, following all the everything that is inside XP, there's not a lot more that you might need. There is less things to complement than if you just adopt some of the other things that are far less prescriptive, or they're more high level, and you need to do far more on your own and put more things together in order to achieve the actual results that you need, mainly when you get to the engineering side. There is the theme, like we were talking about the relevance. There is, when you talk about relevance, is a complicated one, because one thing is to say, like, are those practices, regardless how popular they are today, how well known they are today, are they still relevant in terms of, if we were adopting today, do they still make sense, or they are superseded by other things? And another thing is like the relevance in terms of, are people talking about, are they popular? And I think that popularity wise, they had a PR problem. That's my view. I think that the branding of extreme programming was very narrow, because it really brought that down to programming, and that was not something that was appealing to a lot of businesses that would invest money to do that. The word extreme was also probably against them a bit for more conservative businesses, and they had like the whole even like in the early days, for example, even the training courses on XP and stuff, they were very focused on the low level technical disciplines and not in the holistic framework. So they had a PR problem. But I think that another thing is to say they lost space. Other methodologies became far more popular, and then of course that we were all in the agile world. Let's say, hey, what is the engineering side? And that led to craftsmanship, but that's a different conversation. So, but if we go back today, so XP, I think, like, it's fair to say that didn't reach its full potential in terms of adoption,
yeah,
as it could have reached if they had done things slightly different. But is it still relevant? I think that's probably the question.
Sorry, go on, Jose. Go on.
No, go ahead.
No, I personally think I agree with everything you said, Sandro, except the bit that some things replaced it, because nothing replaced it. In a lot of the cases, I can't see. I mean, we can talk about things like
not in full, but parts of it certainly.
So for example, the way that XP, I mean, I'm gonna pick an example. It talks about simplicity and simple design, right? I haven't seen software being talked about in that way with any other. In fact, I don't want to name certain other methodologies which complicate it more than they need to. And in fact, so that's one thing, for example. And I can pick quite a few examples where the continuous delivery, for example, continuous integration has one can imagine that it's replaced it, but actually frequent releases was a concept in XP, and yes, continuous delivery elaborated on it, right? So I could say that may have replaced one or two of his practices, but I think a lot of the stuff that it talks about, I don't see a lot of other frameworks or methodologies talking about.
No, on the technical side potentially, but for some these other examples, like it's not that it's a one-to-one replacement, but like other more well-known disciplines talk about certain specific values, like small releases, for example, or collaboration, like the sense of a whole team, of integration of teams and stuff, even automation, taking certain like continuous integration to far more advanced level, like with all the continuous delivery and
Yeah, for
backlog,
certainly for some. Yeah, yeah.
right?
I
So
I
certain
agree.
things like they are even like the metaphor, there are again other design disciplines that would bring business. They are far more specific about bringing business and code together. So then when you think about it, because other methodologies also tackled some of the practices of XP, they were, the XP ones were not strong enough, at least in the message, to live on their own. And then what was left was what was not common, what was not targeted by anyone else, that are the technical disciplines.
Not just the technical. There are some other aspects as well. But sorry, Jose,
One
you
thing that I would say is that even because you were saying before that it had a bit of a PR problem, no, because of the focus, or let's say the aim, no, the target audience for something like that, no, like developers, and I think at that it also kind of failed, to be honest, because
Mm,
this is what we see. Like we see people,
true,
they know TDD, or
true.
but they don't know what it. That's still a failure, even for the
The
intended
developer community.
intended audience, no,
Yeah.
in my book. The other thing that I feel also took away from it was the, let's say, the ability of other methodologies to integrate the practices, right? Because you don't see, if you go to a scrum team, no, a lot of the times you hear them talking about practices that, no, or I don't know, other things that are related to that, as the use of stories or things like that, no, are part of, they got integrated into these other frameworks, although they're not part of the description of the framework, but nobody uses them without, no, the those practices. And I feel like that also took quite a lot away from it. So that ease of being able to pick apart the areas that you needed, no, and put them into other frameworks is what I feel also took away from it, and it makes it a bit of an unknown kind of thing, right? Because what is prevalent is the big thing, no, the scrum, the safe, the whatever, right? And then you have all of these practices in there that are not from those frameworks, but they are necessary because you're still doing software, right? And nobody talks about anything else but the practices, right? So
and
it's not even
I
part of the conversation, to be
I
honest.
I and I think like maybe this is part of the thing that makes me a bit sad because like as you might have guessed, I'm a huge fan of XP, and I as a holistic thing I don't see anything rivaling it. And I think part of this is that although it has had all these kind of a PR problems, as you said, it's been not packaged well, as you said, all those things. But Sandro, your question was around relevance. I
Mhm.
personally think that yes, certain things have been, as you said, have been replaced and even elaborated on and so on. But XP still has a lot that can teach us and that is not taught anywhere else. And it's put in a very nice, cohesive package, the source material. You can do much worse than read XP explained from the second edition by Kent book, right? Kent Beck. And I personally think that it's very, very relevant. I personally think that it's more relevant today than it ever was, as systems are getting more complicated, as our solutions are getting more complicated, as we are we are constantly suffering from what we kind of in the old days used to call the agile hangover and all those kind of things, right? And more and more systems need modernization, and the principles, the values, the practices, the ways of working, and the emphasis that it puts on like simplified design and all those things are actually even more important today than they ever were.
So you know that I went through phases with this as well, in terms of my, of course, in the early days of craftsmanship, and I don't want to go off on a tangent and start bringing the craftsmanship to this conversation, but I think that during that time, just the years just before craftsmanship, or in the early days of craftsmanship, I was a diehard extreme fan. extreme programming fun, because like that's what we were trying to. That was the complaint, or the frustrations that a lot of developers, including ourselves, had back then with Agile, is that the technical disciplines were left behind. And in which technical disciplines? The extreme programming disciplines, right? So extreme programming was left behind. It didn't get that same level of popularity or adoption, let's say, that we all wanted it to have, right? So, and that was a frustration, because we wanted XP to be widely adopted. We wanted XP to be the way we worked, right? And we had to push that. Like the craftsmanship was pushing XP, so like, hey, this exists, we want that. But over the years, I start changing my relationship with XP, because I kind of, it's not about giving up on XP, but it's not that far either. Because what I felt is, in order for the framework, the XP framework, to evolve, it needs a strong community and is a strong driver, business driver. And when it lacks, and I'm not talking, because every time I say that, there's always like someone on Twitter that you shout at me, because, I'm still alive. But I'm talking about like, of course, there are still people that are still there pushing XP and stuff, but it's a very small community today compared to what it was before. I don't think that is a community that has the strength to bring XP to mainstream today. And I think that they already missed the boat to have the business appeal today. That ship has sailed.
But who are they?
But this is the thing. So when you look at Kanban, Jose already mentioned, there is a person that is talk Kanban. You think about Dave Dunderson, and there is a Kanban University, and there are a few organizations around that. You think about Scrum, you think about Ken Schreiber and Jeff Sutherland, you think about the Scrum Alliance, you think about a program, you think about like a lot of marketing behind that. So there is a community. There are a few leaders, and there is a live community that has a business.
Several conferences as well. Like events, like global renowned kind of thing.
So they
all
keep
over
the
place.
evolution and stuff. So this is what I'm trying to say. Do I think that the extreme programming practices and values, and that combination of practices and values, relevant today? Yes, I do. I find it relevant. For example, and what do I mean by relevant? If someone says, like we adopt those principles.
That's what I'm saying. That's why my question was, who are they? Are we not the XP people?
No. Well,
anyway.
It depends. We are the ones that we find those practices relevant, and we bring them to the things that we do. But we are not the bearers, the
flag bearers.
ones carrying the flag bearers, traveling the world, evolving. This is our thing, like evolutions, like pushing that forward, doing those integrations, making sure that it's always prominent in the global discussions and stuff. So we don't do that, and there's not a lot of people do that. And the very few that do that, I admire, but it's not enough. So then what I feel is that I find it's relevant, because if you didn't find it relevant, we would not use that in our own company. So relevant it is. But I think that today, I don't think about XP as I used to think before. I don't look at it as a full-blown framework and stuff, although I know it is. But I find it easier to think about other things now, other disciplines that complement or evolve you still use some of the practice, but like, you know what, there is a set of practice and values that I like, I want to keep, but I don't think that, for example, XP is going to evolve. XP is that, and if you need anything else, we need to go outside. We cannot just keep. It's not going to go beyond what it is.
I think if you look at it from the point of view of the movement, then I'm inclined to agree with you. But and that side, yes. But as a body of knowledge, it exists, and it's very much alive, in the sense that, as you said, it's extremely relevant. And as a body of knowledge, more people, especially people coming into the software development industry, need to really read those books, and really need to try to understand a lot of it, because a lot of the problems that we face in the software industry today, there are elements in there that actually seek to address those things. So I think as a, whether it exists as a movement and whether it's adopted by lots of people, and the flag bearers are calling on, and the many communities exist, and they call it extreme programming, I couldn't care less. What I do care about is that as a body of knowledge, it's prevalent, it's relevant, and that it's prevalent, that people still, they, whether you bash the movement as much as you want, but, or the name or whatever, but the knowledge that it contains, that should always be considered the more important part, right? And that knowledge exists, and it's just like going to read a great paper on something, things that often change the industry in a better way. I think we could do much worse than actually really trying to understand the body of knowledge that exists around XP, and how the originators and even people coming afterwards actually described and elaborated on XP.
Yeah, but just to be clear, I was not bashing anything.
Oh,
What I
sorry,
was
no, I
saying.
didn't
Yeah.
mean you were bashing, but I
Right.
know a lot of the
Yeah.
people.
So, and I don't. To be fair, I don't think that nowadays people really bash that either, because like I don't even think that people consider XP more than a few practices, because that's what like a lot of people today would think about. They would name a handful of practices, mostly technical, and they might like or dislike, but I don't think that they go on and criticize anything, because this is the problem that XP as a body of knowledge, this is what for me is what is left, is a body of knowledge. The same way that there are other body of knowledges that I like, some books that I read in the past that are 20 years old that I still think that are relevant. And I said, wow, this is still a good body of knowledge. But that's about it. It's not going to go beyond than that. And I think that as things keep evolving, it becomes, it's not less relevant, but it's not enough anymore, because the world is evolving so much. Like we're not talking about Kanban in mid 90s. Certainly, we were not talking about the cloud. We're not talking about DevOps. We're not talking about many other practices, continuous delivery and things like that. And for me, like, although I still love it, as you said, Mesh, if you ask me today, is there a single body of knowledge that is as important for the way that we work today, just as a single, if you had to pick one? I don't think that there is one that is as good as XP yet. But I don't see that anymore like that. I see that, okay, what is good in this body of knowledge that is still very important? But I sometimes, in order to explain certain things, mainly the way that we collaborate, the way that we release software, the way that we integrate with other areas, and the way that we connect to business, I prefer to use different bodies of knowledge that are more current, more active, to talk about those subjects than try to go back and talk about whole team or continuous delivery starting from small releases or planning games. So I would not be talking about customer tests going back to XP. I would talk about tests how we do today outside XP. It might still be similar or even the same, but it will be far more relatable to use more current.
One thing that I would say, Matt, is that I agree. It's very relevant. But it requires as well the prevalence or adoption in order for it to be even more. No, it's a bit like the tree that falls in the middle of the forest, no, and nobody hears it or whatever, right? Like, yes, if you have a, it's like the lost tome or of XP kind of thing, right? Like nobody's read it, nobody, then it's not, it's like it doesn't exist. You know what I mean? And for me, that's the part that is missing. It's not that it's not relevant in the content and in what is needed. Is that in order for that to make the industry better and have the the impact that it can have, because this is what we're talking about, right? Like it can have a great impact, but in order to have that great impact, it also requires the volume and the adoption, no? And that part is missing. And
I
I would yeah.
and I would agree with that with you, Jose. But the fact is that certain aspects of XP are prevalent, right? Like TDD, pair programming, all those things. Yeah. Now, it's the source material that sets the context of how they are applied. Often, what happens is that these things are applied, but in a bad way, right? Test driven development is a very good example. And although I agree with you that in order to make it more relevant, more prevalent, more people, it needed to have that adoption, and it didn't get that. But parts of it do have it, and I think we should be. The way I see it is that we should be looking back at the reasons why these practices came about in the first place, and XP it describes them very well, right? So especially things that come from it that are kind of almost unique to it, like things like pair programming, testing, and so on. If you then take those things and working back through the principle towards the values, you really start getting to understand it. To me, it's that same problem that we had with the Gang of Four patterns, right? The Gang of Four patterns was, they read Christopher Alexander's patterns language, and they tried to do it, and it was a bad implementation of what was an excellent idea. But you kind of go back and you start understanding the importance of patterns, and then you kind of come to your own conclusion on how patterns can be applied, but not those Gang of Four patterns. So the same thing, I think, like even taking something like test driven development is a complex practice, and more people shoot themselves in the foot with it than actually make it work well for them. And I think part of that is lacking that source knowledge on why they came to be and what the reasons behind them were.
Yeah, but I don't think that this will be. For example, I lost hope that extreme programming will be mainstream one day. I think that that ship has sailed a long time, and I think that it was about around 2018, maybe our first. I think in our first SC London, the Software Craftsmanship London conference, I had a slide. I was trying to understand how popular software craftsmanship was, and I was looking, and that goes back to 2017 or 18. I don't remember which year that I was presenting it. And I remember that I had a slide that I was looking for a lot of meetup groups, what the relevance of certain terms, or that means which terms appeared in how many communities, just to understand what was more popular than other. So, for example, TDD was like 3-4 times more popular than extreme programming. So the meetup groups that mention TDD in the description were 3-4 times more than the ones that would mention XP. And if I had to guess, today it just became even wider, that difference. I think that the people that talk about TDD today are far more than the ones that talk about XP. So for me, TDD is completely overshadowed extreme programming. Not overshadowed, maybe it's not the right term, but like it is a practice. And because the TDD, what happened with TDD, although it's still the adoption is not as wide as we would like to see, but it has a business appeal today. The market, the industry is a bit more mature and more accepting, or even like not even accepting, is demanding even test automation. And through, so you find far more today than we found 15 years ago. 15 years ago, we were convincing everyone.
And one thing is, because before you said there are parts that are still that are mainstream. What I don't see happening is those parts bringing in the rest, right? Like that I don't see happening. It's like they have been exported out of it. They're being integrated into something else. But I don't see the conversation happen. Like it's not going to happen that, hey, wait, by the way, where, how did TDD come to be, right? Like, that's not a question that people are
No,
asking.
that's not a conversation that
Yeah,
people are
that's
having.
not a, so getting back to that root is what I don't see from the prevalence of the things that are mainstream, is
No,
what I'm
I agree with you. That's not, yeah, that's not what I was trying to say. I was more trying to say that, it's good to go back to try to understand the reasons behind the thing that you're doing. Whether that then is going to somehow magically bring the other parts of XP back, no. Because again, all the problems, as you discussed about its adoption, remain. And I think they are, again, like all the things you've said, I agree with. But I also think that it's because of its scope, because of certain aspects that are not like do this and that and that and that and that, because it doesn't have that kind of packageability. It's a holistic thing. It doesn't have that packageability like other things have, right? It's not an easy sell. But I think also because of the way it is, the very down to earth philosophy that it comes from, right, is also what I, in my opinion, and I'm just, this is conjecture, is what drove, like, because it came from, in my view, this is just my opinion, it came from a good place. It came from people with a good heart, and they were not thinking about uh, making it a business.
I think that this is yeah, I understand it was an opinion, because I think that there are the two sides. You can have people that are, well, let's say they have questionable intentions when they are promoting certain things or creating a business, but there are things that are good and strong and they are easy to digest, and they themselves will create a demand, because if people look at it, so you know what, although it was not created as a business, like it is a thing that we want to adopt. And TDD is one of them. It took a long time. TDD had a very rough path, right? So we as developers, that we like, how much we suffered that, like companies would reject, would not give you time for that. So I mean, like, we were trying to push TDD. We had resistance of other developers. Companies would not allow you to write automated tests. When we start talking about that in the early 2000s, companies would not even allow you to write automated tests, right? They would drop if you broke your tasks in, oh, I'm gonna do this and that, and I'm gonna write the unit test. They would, so no, let's deprioritize the unit test. We came a long way, right? And now today we had even contracts where our clients were expecting tests to be automated, and they expect not only to be automated, but also the developers to use test-driven development specific, like not just writing a test afterwards. So we came a long way, but I think that TDD, it was different from Scrum or Kanban. Like it's now found its place through merits, through need, not because there is a business industry. There's no TDD alliance, right? So there are coaches, there are people specialized on all those things, but there's no centralized control of TDD, for example.
Yeah. No, but there are other things that I think have a lot of merit. It's just they're very difficult to apply because they pack a lot in a single sentence, right? Like if you look at four rules of simple design and it says it's small, right? There is a lot to be unpacked out of there, and a lot of the times, what or a lot of times because they are, I mean,
It says
part of the,
fewer elements, I think.
yeah, has fewer elements, but it's now it's because they leave a lot to you. They're not like, do this and do that. They leave a lot to you. I think they have a lot of merit, and if we really kind of put emphasis on it, and even the way we teach design, for example, just taking this as an example and so on, and really start going behind those things, and we can right quite a few wrongs in the kind of the software that people are producing in this day and age.
So the way, so yeah, no, I agree. But for example, the way I see today is, if you have a company, right, so that has that background, right, so for example, we went through this transition, right, so the pre-agile, post-agile, and craftsmanship and everything else. If you have that background, that kind of history, let's say, or connection to certain methodologies, I think that the XP is the right. So we should keep teaching the same, and we are still teaching our people about some of the practices. We should talk about XP and stuff as a value thing. But for example, if we are driving change in a new company, I would not potentially say you need to, oh, we would let's see if we can adopt extreme programming. I would probably not use the word. So I would just say, like, what if we try to automate our tests in here? Maybe if we have more collaboration there, let's see if we integrate our work more often. Let's see if we bring more people together that to collaborate closely. So you will find different ways, or even if you need to name, you probably would name something a bit more modern that they can relate. We shouldn't, let's say we have DevOps or continuous
Not
delivery.
just modern, but less scary, because the
possibly.
word extreme is scary, right? It's not.
Yeah,
It's not a nice
it
word.
might alienate, because like it's like, yeah, you're talking about extreme programming. We are trying to solve a business problem, and for
Yeah,
them, like, if they don't
exactly.
have
Yeah.
that connection, just
You
looking
know,
at the
the
words,
funny
it's
thing
too
is,
far apart.
most of extreme programming is not extreme and not about programming
Right,
directly.
right. But again, like
It's a
telling the
shame.
story today, exactly. So this is the point. This is why I say, like, the ship has sailed, right? So when we are trying to bring some of those practices and values to organization, we probably would not use the words. We are not going to say we are going to do a whole extreme programming transformation. We're going to bring.
But
So
again, this has to do with the macro system around it, not just with the, like, you're saying that because the approach that we follow is very much a pool approach, right? Like, we land where the client is, and then we help them improve, no, from where
Mhm.
they are. And sometimes, just adopting certain practices would already make a big difference, no, towards that, no, and practices in themselves you can apply without having like complete alignment with everything, with all of the other values, right? Like, as long as you care about quality, you probably can do okay with automating tests, right? Like, that's more or less the you don't have to have all the other things in alignment. Yeah. And you can get there, but slowly. But that's not the way that a lot of organizations try to go for agility, right? The way that goes is once it went into Harvard Business Review and etc., everyone was, oh, we need to be agile. Wait, bring the army of agile coaches, right? Let's do this, and we want to do it in 6 months, right? And by the way, it's not very well defined. Then someone came up with the, oh well, let's do safe, right? Let's define it. Let's define it very well, and for your scale, and for your, and now we're gonna train your people. We're gonna, and we'll, whether you like it or not, those things help adopt. I'm not saying they help get great results, yeah, but packaging is not, which are two very different, but it's adopted, like people know about it. It's in the common,
The zeitgeist.
exactly, no. And I don't see anything inherently bad with the whole building a business around it, as long as there is an ethical component to making sure that what you're doing is not harming the organization, is not, you know what I mean? So where I see a problem is when it just becomes about the money, right? Like, when it's just,
Yeah.
listen, I'll train you. Oh, this works. This is perfect. And then I go and screw another organization, then another organization, and then
Yeah.
another organization, right?
In,
And
in
that's what I see in it. But that's an ethical issue. That's not
yeah.
a methodology. That is people doing things that they shouldn't be doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Um,
totally agree. Like, in a lot of cases, you look at all these great inventions, and it's often not the inventor, but the one who really brought the ideas forth, right? You got the typical Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, right? Who one can argue who was more important, right? Steve Wozniak created the computer, but if it wasn't for Steve Jobs, it would have remained in that garage.
yeah, I always say that, like, Scrum at the time was a blessing and a curse at the same time, right? So because like in a way we can criticize as much as we want, but like without Scrum becoming popular, uh, Scrum helped a lot of organizations across the world. It helped to make them aware of agility or of working in a better way and stuff. And
And
it
some of
was
the XP practices even.
totally. So exactly. So as Scrum became more and more adopted, and of course that they said, hey, they suffered a lot of criticism as well, a few failures, but like they said, look, we need the engineering side, and by the way, we can look at XP as well, or some, at least some of the technical parts of XP. So at least made them organizations more aware, and we know from experience, it's much easier for us, for a company that is highly focused on technical practices and engineering excellence. It's much easier to bring the engineering practices to an organization that has already adopted either Scrum or Kanban, they are already working in that format, than going with our technical practice without having that foundation. Is much harder. Like trying to bring TDD and all these the ways that we like to work technically, like with a company that doesn't work in a in a more collaborative and small releases approach, it's very complicated. Very complicated. It's much
So
easier to come
one
afterwards.
so one thing, now that we're getting to the hour mark, yeah, I'll move my questions forward. So
Okay,
Oh,
Jose, what
now
is the
you're
new
getting
topic?
warmed up.
Yeah, what is the
that-
new topic that you want to
so
propose
what
now?
do you think? Before you were saying, I kind of lost hope that that was going to
Mhm.
change, or
Mhm.
it's going to become mainstream or whatever. Uh, let's say that it could. Let's say that it could. What would it need in order to become mainstream in
Mhm.
your book?
Okay, so that's a tricky question because I don't believe that is possible. But like I'll go with the
Okay,
assumption that
if
I believe that is possible. So in order to make that possible, right? So uh, I need to be a bit creative here, but I think that we'll need.
but what if, Sandro?
Yeah.
Believe,
Right. Okay.
believe.
So I think that we will need, first of all, a few heads of people that are very well known, and they will need to modernize some books. For example, if they taking the history, I'm not trying to rewrite history. I'll say like from today, if we had to start from today, try to bring XP to mainstream, we will need to update the material to start. So there will be a few heads that will be traveling and banging the drums everywhere they go, and they will jump in every meeting, and they will be in those agile conferences, they will be in the all those digital transformation companies, they will conference, there will be a few heads that you need to be there making noise. They will need to bring new material up. They will need to modernize those things, because now we have continuous integration, we have continuous delivery, we have DevOps, we have cloud, we have like lean is and Kanban are far more popular. So there are so there is DevOps, right? So there are loads of stuff that didn't exist before. So TDD is quite well known. So they would need to work hard to modernize the message and start exciting people and creating a business demand. Once they are able to do that, then of course it creates business opportunities, because as soon as they are pushing and people start talking about that, more and more companies will say, hey, now that you are saying that, yeah, we are missing that. We have all these other stuff already, but there are elements of what you are saying that are missing in our organization. We would like a bit of that. And then that's when they start generating a market of people that are specialized, that they will help organizations. But it's not an easy thing. You need to mobilize. We need a very charismatic people to do that. A few new books, and it's not one person; it's a group of people making noise, collaborating. They will need to cross the bridge. They will need to either collaborate very well with what is in there, or create a big fight. So or shed some blood. So just to bring attention.
I think collaborate is probably much better, and
No,
XP
no
has the
doubt, no
scope
doubt.
to actually bring a lot of these things together, because
Mhm,
in itself it has not a lot of ego, and
mhm,
and because it's not trying to never really tried to kind of stake its own territory. Maybe that was one of his problems. Is that he can bring a lot of those things together. I personally would love to have Kent Beck like update that book. He's talking about geek incentives, which are quite interesting, but I'd much rather he updated the XP Explained book.
Yeah, I don't have hopes that the creators will have the energy. I think that they've moved on a long time ago,
Yeah, I think so.
right?
So yeah.
So you need a new generation uh, to bring that up with a lot of new energy and influence.
Yeah, so you mentioned a few things that I agree that would be necessary, right? Like you mentioned the whole having figurehead for, let's call it the renaissance, no, the the movement, no. You're gonna need a community. I
Yeah.
think it's as important having those figureheads, but the reality is that the change is made by the people, and with a strong community you will have those people, spreading the message and so on, right? So that will be quite important. I think the I don't know so much about updating the book itself. I think the book can stay like that, but new material needs to come up to fill in the gap, to bridge the differences between the different things and so on. Yeah. And there is an important aspect in that, which is also data, which is something that, for instance, Jeff Sutherland has done very well. He's the only one, I think, that has gotten the methodology and then went and built, like actually did research and papers and things around how well does this work, etc., right? Like I think is one of the biggest things, because that creates proof, not only from a point of view of social proof, but also there is some evidence, whether it's good or bad or whatever, or
Mhm.
bias or not. You still have the data. And I think another important aspect to that is a touching on the new generations, which is something, let's say not the new generation, but the systems that create the new generation, which is something that also Scrum has done very well. Yeah. Like
Mhm.
universities, for instance, right? And going and creating master programs on agility, where basically you teach Scrum and a few things around that, no, or things like this. And I feel like that would also help with that, because there is the community aspect to make it happen and to make it evolve and so on, but you also need some sort of machinery, no, or system that will take people who are now joining the industry and they know about this from the get-go, right? Because you can't always be breaking, like having people break the barrier to then get to that, to then evolve, right? Like the prevalent thing should not be the old way of doing things, and that also needs to change, I think.
There is one element that it would be also critical that I just considered now, is that it doesn't matter like having big figures and stuff, but they cannot have the old message. For example, they cannot just revive the old practices, because some of the old practices, either they were superseded or there are other methodologies that would probably talk better about some of them, or they would have very well established methodologies, practices, as we discussed, like TDD and pair programming and stuff, that they themselves, they have life on their own now, right? So they will not help to bring XP. What they would need, I think, is maybe, I don't know exactly how many, but like a handful of new practices that will be a bit groundbreaking, that will be very thought provoking, that will be a bit like out of the box thinking, like those practices, the XP practices were 25 years ago, right? So they will need to shake some foundation in how we see things, so that people will at least be curious or even be threatened or challenge it and say like, oh, we've been promoting this for X amount of time, and now those guys are talking about something different that is So they will need something punchier in terms of the new ways of working to create traction as well.
They could even talk, actually, I mean, talk about the things that are not well adopted, but describe them better. So they can describe simple design better. I know Corey Haynes tried, but it wasn't, I mean, it was good book for a bunch of examples, but it's not. They could describe, they could go deeper into the meta framework, as we were talking about, the values, the principles. I think Kent Beck had a very, very insightful ideas on how the practices and values are breakthrough principles. I think there's a lot of, if you distill those kind of things, make it explain better, make it more accessible for the new generation, as it were. I think that would also help.
I think one last thing that it would need, and maybe Mash is not gonna like this very much, is it would need the commercial incentive.
Yeah.
I
No,
don't see.
don't get me
I
wrong, Jose. Like, no, I was just kind of like, just kind of going to. I run a business, of course. I like, I think I
No, but you know
business.
what I mean. But you know what I mean. Like that schema where there is also a business incentive to
Mhm.
teach and to apply the methodology, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like that would also help in that sense as well, because it will definitely make it spread a lot faster.
Yeah. No doubt.
Um, yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So shall we wrap up then?
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, thank you very much for listening. And as I said, if you like it, subscribe and hit the like button and leave us comments and give us ideas for new fireside chats, because we are running out of ideas. So it'll be great to have new ideas.
And if you disagree, put it in the comments as well, because we would love
Exactly.
to hear what
Exactly.
you think. No, it's
Yes.
like how
Yes.
we
Exactly.
tell us that we're wrong. We also
Yeah.
learn from that, so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
good.
All right. Cool. Thanks.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you very much.